Hi, this is Ray Gordon from Moving Medina Forward, and I thought it'd be interesting to sit down with Tim Turton and from the Kids First Medina and from Mark Kuhar from the Medina City School's Outrage page, just to get a recap of what's transpired over the last 9 months. So I'm going to start off with a few questions, and you guys feel free to elaborate as much or as little as you want. So first for Mark, when all this started back on March 4th, what were your thoughts? I mean, I know that the page didn't go up until the 5th, but I'm assuming you had some time to think about it before you started it.
On the 4th, what we felt, what many felt in the community was this first of all, it was a sense of just kind of incredulous, like this cannot be going on right now. And then after we found out what was going on and it was true, there was this sense of betrayal. It was like our school district is in financial straits right now, and we just gave a whole pile of money to the superintendent. Something's wrong here. So that was kind of the feelings that were percolating back around that time.
Yeah. So Tim, the first time I ran into you was at the March 6th meeting at the Middle Auditorium, when it was really the first time that the public engaged the school board.
For sure.
What did you think was going on then?
I can tell you what I felt. I felt like I got punched in the stomach. If you look at it, last fall we missed passing the levy by 950 votes, and we haven't passed the levy since 2005. So we thought going into this year, we're on a journey, we're going to have to try to capture half of those 950 and push this over the finish line.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer, right?
No-brainer. You know, because I think if we can get more communication, use social media more effectively, we'd have this done. But I got to tell you, I left that night shaking my head, saying, wow, you know, we're in trouble. And to Mark's point, I mean, there's betrayal. Frankly, I felt like, I'm not sure about this levy either at that time, because we've got to get these questions answered. And believe me, I'm a big cheerleader for the schools, always have been, frankly, probably always will. However, that night, I shook my head and said, we're in trouble.
Yeah. So fast forward and the Outrage page starts going. What was the initial goal of that page? What were you thinking about the entire sort of movement, if you will?
When all the events started to transpire, I was talking with my wife, and she had talked to other people, and people had emailed, and calls were going back and forth, and my wife said, you should start a Facebook page. Everybody needs a place to kind of gather and get their thoughts together and vent. So the initial idea was to have a place for people to come together and all talk at the same time and share thoughts and frankly to vent and say what they were mad about. And it was kind of a place to coalesce those types of feelings. And then as things went on, it became a place for news to evolve. News would break, and people would offer opinions, and people would wonder what was going to happen, and all sorts of different ideas and people's thoughts became merged with the news stories that were coming out of the time, and it became really a community forum of the highest order, and with a specific purpose, a focus on making Medina City Schools right.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I know you're not a web guy per se. I mean, pretty much a neophyte when it comes to Facebook. But what type of traffic were you getting on there? Do you have any idea how many people were actually seeing what was being posted there at that time?
Well, we started out. I remember that first week before we went into that forum at the PAC Center, the community forum at the PAC Center. We already had 900 some people that had liked the Facebook page, and literally thousands of people were tuning in via the multiplication of the views and people sharing it on other pages. So really overnight, thousands of eyes were going on what was being said.
Amazing. Sure. So Tim, when you had to stand up at the board meeting and talk to the school board about what to do with the levy, why don't you go into what the emotions were and what sort of led you to the decision that you came to?
That's a good question, because we had an opportunity, and frankly, we were prepared to have the ballot, levy on the ballot in August, as you know. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I, and Lisa Jackson, we co-chair the Friends of, at the time, Friends of Medina Schools, now Kids First. We thought about this, and for us to go out and have that issue on the ballot, go out and communicate to the community, get teachers involved, get people to contribute money, just didn't seem right, because frankly, we had lost that trust. We need to regain that. There was issues around the board and the superintendent that had to change. And frankly, communication, to Mark's point as well, it was not transparent. Judging from what happened with the Outrage page, people just weren't clear what was happening in schools. So as we thought about it, it actually became a no-brainer to stand up in that meeting, Ray, and say, there's no way we're going to support having that levy on the ballot in August. And frankly, I stood up and I said, we will back out of our role as co-chairman, or I would back out of our role as co-chairman if the board decided to put it on the ballot. It just didn't make any sense. And not to mention the fact it's about $25,000 to do so, and that levy was doomed to fail. And if I look at it from fiduciary responsibility, or financial responsibility, if you will, it just didn't make sense. Why would we waste our money on that? Just to get a bunch of no votes.
So Mark, what was the feeling of the board when you first started asking the questions as to the things that concerned the superintendent's contract, his policies and procedures? How did they respond to that?
When we first started asking questions of the board, when all this happened and we started going to the meetings and the forums, the board was very standoffish. The board was looking at this from the standpoint of, don't worry about it, we got this. Just sit back and we've got this handled. And frankly, there wasn't literally anybody who thought the board had this handled. The people that were really the driving forces on the board at that point, they needed a very, very big reality check, and that reality check came from the community at large, when they started questioning not only the decisions that were made with regard to a salary and a bonus for the superintendent, but almost every financial decision that the board had its hands on. People all of a sudden wanted to know what they were doing, why they were doing it, who was taking responsibility for this, who voted for that, and all of a sudden, in very short order, you had civic engagement of the highest order, and the board, they started reeling, and that's when we started to see resignations, when we started to see apologies, when we saw new people added to the board that came in with a different perspective, and all of a sudden that whole dynamic with the community and the board, it started to change, and it was a refreshing change. And I think a lot of people looked at that and they said, this is going somewhere now. We're making a difference here.
Well, how did you see the change in communication? Early on, it was very much, except questions on index cards. Everything was submit your questions via email.
Yeah, a good example was the board had a work session, and prior to the work session, we had organized a protest out on the sidewalk in front of the school.
With Bill the Alien.
Bill the Alien showed up, and he carried his sign that said the board is from another planet. And at that point, what we were hearing from the board is, we're not doing what we're doing to please you or answer your concerns. And if you have any problems, there's this contact box on the website that you can send us a question, or we're very good at responding to emails. It was very flippant, and it was very much standoffish. But as time went on, it became apparent to most of the people on the board, this isn't the way things were going to go, because it wasn't going to be acceptable to the community. And then we started to see the type of engagement that you really want to see out of a school board. We started to see them answering questions, being responsive to people coming up to them and talking. We started to see people from the board go out in the community and engage people and gather their responses rather than people coming to them. And people started to look at that and said, okay, all right, now we're making a difference here.
So,
can I add to that?
Sure.
That's an important point, because I saw that kind of transformative change as well. You get the board who, at times, their job is to oversee the schools, obviously. They've got oftentimes a difficult task. And I will say, by full disclosure, I happen to like many of the people on the board. In fact, all the people are good people. I don't think they're bad. I think sometimes they make bad decisions. And the community demanded, frankly deserved, answers, transparent, not just on index cards that were already submitted, if you will.
Homogenized
Correct.
answers, right?
We don't want, it was not a time to have homogeneous answers. You had to dive deep into solutions, and what I really liked, what happened in the last 6 to 9 months, is the engagement of the community. Finally, people stood up and said, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to listen and participate in the board meeting, because many of those people I have never seen at a board meeting before. You know what? Thankfully, they're engaged.
And you know what? I'm one of those people. I sat on my fat behind for 30 years since I graduated high school and never been to a board meeting. Heck, I couldn't even tell you when I was in high school who was on the board. And now I know every one of them by name.
Well, the board, for years and years and years, whoever was on that board, because so few people in the community were dialed into what they were doing and paying attention, the board, I think, really got into an operating habit of saying, we're going to pretty much do what we want to do, and we'll take your opinion into consideration, but that they really didn't feel that engagement from the public, and we're all to blame for that. I mean, I'm certainly to blame for it. I didn't go to a board meeting prior to being upset and getting engaged in what was going on with the latest incarnation, but all of that changed, with what went on here, and I say that's a change for the good.
No, for sure. I think back, speaking of sitting on your hindsight, before I got involved as co-chairperson of the Levy, I sat back and I'd comment on things and I'd say, well, geez, I want that change or that change, as I'm flipping through channels and watching ESPN and the Browns on TV. Well, I got involved. And by getting involved and stepping up and understanding the facts and realizing what's happening, that really brought me to this point. And again, like I said before, we were 950 votes short before. I got punched in the stomach back in March, but I think we're back. And I think it's important to note too that, we had the Outrage page over here. You had the Kids First Medina over here. And I would argue that at one point it looked like a parallel path. But now, as I kept looking at it, and I've known Mark for several years, great family, passionate guys, but those paths actually converged. And I prayed to God that the convergence happened before the levy, before November, and it has. And now we're back on the same track. We came at it from a slightly different approach, but I know for a fact we had the schools and the kids, teachers, the community, etc., our best interest in mind. So ultimately, I knew we were going the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always been a huge supporter of the schools, especially of the teachers. I've often had my differences with some things that went on the administration side and some of the rules and regulations type stuff that gone on, but I've never voted against a levy. And when this came up, that was the first time I ever said to myself, I don't think I can support a levy for the school system under this scenario. Something's got to change. And all the things that happened brought me back to that point. I mean, I started to see the things happen that I think the whole community needs to see in order for a levy vote to make sense for a lot of people. And a lot of those changes have taken place. They're still taking place. There's more changes that are going to come. But like Tim said, two paths that looked like at one point they were going a different way converged, and we are on the same page.
Right. I mean, so Tim, what do you think? You're out in the community, obviously talking to people. What were they telling you prior? It's about the middle of this. Say the summertime, once the levy was announced that it was going to be back on the ballot. What were people thinking? What were they saying that would take to sway them to vote for a levy?
Besides saying I was crazy being involved, they would say, frankly, that things have to change. What's up with Randy's contract? What's up with teachers? How's their contract? Things I wasn't necessarily involved with, but are on their mind. This whole idea of certainly the bonus was paid to Randy, but a lot of roads kept leading back to the school board, and they said changes have to occur there. Again, I don't think people said they're bad people, but bad decisions. People wanted to change there.
Accountability, right?
Accountability. And frankly, you don't always get that in government. You don't get that oftentimes in Washington, but people vote local. When they vote local, they say, I can change that, because their vote really does matter. So that was a big issue, right? Because I had some people say, I'm supporting the schools, but if you can do something about Randy's contract, which I can't, but the board, what can you do there to influence that? Make sure the teachers are on board, which they clearly are. A lot of different things, a lot of noise around it, right? But ultimately came down to they just wanted a voice, they wanted to be heard, they wanted accountability, change, and doggone it, if they go to a meeting, they offer an idea, they want it to be heard.
Sure, sure. And now they can ask, they can interject. I mean, the
Right.
changes that have taken place during the board meetings are really amazing. I mean, they have questions right after they sort of have the different points that whenever anybody comes up to present, and before the approval of any policy, there's questions that can be answered before the vote, which is something that had never happened before.
And that's important. I mean, it's important to have that voice, because we're a community, for crying out loud. We're a small community, and people do care. You know, I wouldn't get involved in this or stay involved in it if I knew people didn't care. And passion, one side or the other, is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. So to dovetail on that, Mark, do people care?
I think people care a lot. For sure, people care a lot. They care about the community. They care about what they see in terms of how the school operates, how the board operates, how the teachers go about their business. Yeah, people care a lot, and I don't think we would have seen what we saw happen in this community if people didn't care. If people just woke up and said, yeah, well, I can't do anything about it, and they were just apathetic about the whole thing. The board never would have changed, the superintendent never would have changed, and nothing would have happened. But it's a different breed here. It's people who feel very strongly, and if they feel they can change things, they're going to sit up and change them, and it's a good thing.
Right, for sure.
So, I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's the removal of the superintendent? Do you think it's the resignation of the school board? Do you think it's the policy changes? What do you think is the most foremost on people's minds as far as the changes that have taken place?
Well, I think people, and talking about it in terms of a school levy, in the past, people's opinion went from the standpoint of, I don't believe that they can manage themselves financially successfully, and therefore I don't feel like I should give them more money. I think you're starting to see people change a little bit now. Because in the past there was maybe a lack of information, and now there's much more information that's out in the public, and it's coming from all directions. It's coming from the newspaper, it's coming from social media, it's coming from websites, it's coming from books, from TV. But people are starting to learn a lot more, and maybe it's because they want to learn a lot more, but people are starting to learn a lot more about what's going on in the community. As soon as you get that knowledge and you understand what's going on, then you can figure out what you can change and what you can't change. But I think a lot of people who maybe were skeptical of the school and the school board and the whole activity of what's going on around managing the schools, they now see that those things are they're going in the right direction. The business is being managed differently, and that's the kind of thing that people look at and say, okay, I can support a levy, and I can support approving an additional $200 a year, $300 a year, because I feel like the money's going to be managed successfully, because the people are now much more competent, and they're much more, I guess, they are more engaged with the community and wanting to show them that they're financially transparent and financially capable.
So, Tim, have you seen any cultural changes in the schools?
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the school specifically, not with the board and whatnot, but I mean the interaction that the administrators have with the public and that type of thing.
I interact, I'm sure Mark you do as well, but a lot with the teachers and administrators certainly. It's an interesting question, because I do feel like they've reached out more to the public. I've always thought they care deeply about the kids. They've done a fine job there. But I think they're connecting the dots more with the parents, with the kids, with the community, and they realize that what they do every day and how they interact does make a difference in how people vote. It's not just the classroom, it's how you interact in conferences, or how you walk in the square and you see parents of the children you teach or other people. And I think they've done a great job. Frankly, the teachers and administrators did a wonderful job last fall in not just donating money, but also their time. But now I think they've donated time, money, blood, sweat, and tears. I think it's much deeper.
And maybe have a clearer understanding what the community is looking for?
I absolutely think so.
Yeah.
I thought a lot about this over the weekend. I spent time in Upper Arlington and Columbus, and they were trying to pass a levy. I drove around prior to the Ohio State game, and they had levy signs, some for, some against. But I talked to a friend of mine about it, and they said there's no connection, or there's a lack of connection with the schools and the community. And I said, geez, I don't feel that here. I feel quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Again, some of it is not always positive, but I think there's a connection. I mean, people are engaged.
There's an engagement,
right.
Exactly.
And we are so blessed to have a community like Medina that, boy, we get that opportunity.
What about you, Mark? Have you seen any change in sort of the culture of the schools?
The biggest change that I've seen in the schools is people within the schools, whether it's the teachers, the administration, they seem to be going a lot more further out of their way to communicate with the community. Mm-hmm. We're getting more emails, we're getting more notifications, there's more things that are coming up on the website. I think before I don't think they understood how much people want to be in the loop, and they didn't keep people in the loop because they just didn't feel it was important enough. But they've come to that realization, and you're starting to see more and more of that. And I mean, that is a success element across the board. If the teachers are talking, and the administration is talking, and the school as a formal entity is talking, and the board's putting out more information, and there's social media sites where people are talking, I mean, it all moves the process forward, and I think everybody benefits from that.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I bring, the other person we really haven't mentioned by name, it's probably fair to do so, is Dave Knight.
Yeah.
I think, Randy certainly had a skill set, probably more business focused. Dave, the pendulum is probably on the other end of the spectrum, but Dave, in terms of communicating with the public, he's all about that. He's got a way about him that he's very relational, he communicates the facts, but boy, he's done a great job of reaching out to the public with seniors, as well as people with kids in school, and those who don't, that are younger, and looking to put their kids in school after kindergarten.
Sure. But
he's done a great job of connecting the dots as well.
I absolutely echo that. In the previous superintendent looked at the community from he's up here and they're down here. Dave Knight just done an outstanding job. He's integrated in the community. He's everywhere. He talks to everybody. He's engaged with everybody. He's making decisions. He's getting input. He's working on multiple fronts. He's exactly what this community needed, and he came right at the right time.
He's sort of a warm blanket.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
So from each of you, where are we now? Where do you think we're at in this overall sort of healing process, and well, maybe even before the healing process, fixing the things that were broken?
Well, I think we've moved along the trail an extremely long way since March, when everything transpired here. Some of the things we've seen really have just been astounding. We've seen board resignations and board replacements and interim superintendents and legal maneuvering and superintendents being put on leave. We've seen all that kind of stuff go on, and we've seen people become more engaged. We've seen a number of things happen that really show that the issues are percolating with the community, and everyone in the community is understanding what's going on, and really what the implications are of us not being successful with what we're doing. Because if we don't get to a point where we deal with the school's issues, I firmly believe the school is the bedrock of the community, and if you don't have a strong school system, your community is weakened and it's lesser as a result. And a lot of people come to the realization we got to support the school, and we have to do what it takes to build it up on multiple levels. But we didn't have that back in March. It was a totally different ballgame back in March, and we've really come a long way since then to gain that.
Yeah.
last 6 months, we certainly identified the issues, we've addressed them, and I think, in the spirit of the playoff season, I suppose, we're peaking at the right time. We've connected the dots between different organizations, again, seemingly on parallel paths at one time, we're together, but the changes in the board, which I happen to think the transition is very appropriate with both Susan and Carla, because it's an orderly transition, which makes a lot of sense to me. The issues around Randy's contract are certainly very appropriate at this time. There's always people walking in the rooms, it's always good, that's all right. But certainly transparency, which is so evident now. So I think with the levy passing in November, it'd be incumbent upon all of us, those watching, certainly the three of us in this room, to stay engaged, be involved. Schools are the bedrock. If I look at it, why did I get involved in levy? Why do I do this? Because truly our kids only have one spin. They only have one chance to go through the schools. You can't tell your 8th grader, hey, 2 years when levy passes, go back to 8th grade and take band, or play football. It's right now. Yeah. And we do it for the kids. And another thing, the business community too, Ray. And the business communities come together and they're supporting the levy because strong schools mean strong community, which includes the business community, who people may or may not have kids in school, but that's important too.
Well, it's interesting. There's a quote from the first president of Harvard University. He said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And, I think that's a pretty profound statement. There's a lot of people who are concerned about, my taxes are going to go up. But what's the reality? Paying for prison? It's just not, it's not viable.
Not an option.
Yeah. So I guess in closing up, Mark, where do you think we're going?
I think Medina as a community and Medina as a school district has been fundamentally altered by what has happened since March. And I think a lot of the things that needed to be corrected are now have either been corrected or in the process of being corrected. And if the community stays engaged and the community continues to build on what we've got right now, I think we can create literally the best school district in the state, because we'll have the right people in place and we'll have the community involved to such a degree that nothing that happened before could happen again. There'll be enough transparency, there'll be enough successful people on board, and whether that's a board position or an administrative position, I think nothing but good things can come in the future based on what's happened right now.
Sure. And Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you have to hit rock bottom sometimes to rise back up, and that's what we've done. Again, we're not there entirely, but we're getting there. Look at passing the levy is absolutely imperative to getting us there, because you have to have strong schools. You have to. Number one thing people talk about if you're selling your home, if you did it today, even the no voters would say, oh, we got great schools.
Yeah.
Come on. So, but this community is unique in Ohio. I travel a lot, I know you guys do as well, but Medina is a special place, and we've been here 15 years. And I've raised 3 kids, I've got my third, which is a freshman in high school. I want him to have the experience, but I also want the people in the kindergarten and have a great experience.
Sure.
And it's just, the time is now, and I say, if not now, when?
Exactly. All I'd ask of the people who are listening to this, and I'm sure both of you agree, is stay engaged.